When we think of the classics, there are pretty much two genres. There's tragedy and there's comedy. But how we understand tragedy and comedy today is not how they applied it back then. See, the only thing to classify something as a comedy is if it ended happily. And the only thing that really classified anything as a tragedy is if it ended, not happily. I don't care how much jokes were in the play or in the work. I don't care how much death and sadness was in the book. If it ended on a happy ending, it was a comedy. That's how it was viewed back then. And comedy and tragedy have pretty much, in the classical sense, been the two main classifications of any work of fiction, really. Or even not of fiction, but... So why am I bringing this up? Well... Oh no, I thought I was going to start off this video, starting it with an actual cool intro and then, make my words sound coherent. But obviously this isn't scripted, so I don't know what I was thinking. But I like anime. Let's go up with that. This is basically going to be a lot like my Koi no Katachi ramblings, where I just talk about my thoughts on a show or movie I just watched. And what I just watched was an anime called Koi to Uso, or Love and Lies. And I have a lot of thoughts on this show. Let's see. The thing I think it's very interesting, and the reason I think it's very interesting is because this is a genre that's kind of rare. In anime, I think romantic comedies, rom-coms, those are everywhere. I've watched a lot of romance comedies, and the thing is, I really like the romance genre, because it's very easy to elicit an emotional response from the romance genre. Because of that, it's also easy to make a crappy romance anime. But if you do it right, it's very easy to make a romance anime that really elicits emotional response. And when I watch anime, what I really want is an emotional response from myself. That's how wow, I'm really getting into this because I'm actually feeling something for these characters. I want to see these characters succeed. I like these characters. Or if it's done poorly, if you don't set up good premise or interesting characters, then it's like, okay, who cares if they're going out on a date for the first time, But romance comedies plague the romance genre of anime. But very rarely do you see a romance tragedy. Now, I like comedy every now and then, but I really like tragedy. Tragedy and romance though you can get good emotional responses from them, as opposed to the more superficial, can be more superficial romance comedy. But romance tragedy is rare, and I've only really seen it done twice in anime. And that's one with Kuzu no Honkai, Scum's Wish, which I absolutely hated, because I don't feel empathetic towards the characters in that show. They don't feel like real people to me. They feel like they were just written by an edgy middle schooler. Then you have Koi to Uso, and when I was starting to watch this, at first I thought I had cracked... I had found gold. I had found a show that was romance tragedy with actual likable characters. Takasaki Misaki, what a name! I'm really into this character. It reminds me of some people I know IRL. The same thing can be said with Ririna. And also an important part is the commentary in Koi to Uso. There's a good bit of critique of Japanese culture that I think is something interesting. In Japanese culture, there's sort of this idea that, the nail that sticks out will get hammered back in. You don't want to do anything to disrupt society. You don't want to, be an outlier. And this show really it's the manga. It's the source material, but we'll talk about the manga later. This work, I guess, is sort of a critique of that philosophy in Japanese society, that sometimes the whole of society doesn't know what's best. And sometimes if, say specifically in the context of this show, if the government gets too much control of your life, but everyone's doing it, that still can be bad. But we'll get to my critiques of the characters and premise later on. The plot of the story is For those of you who don't know, Japan is facing a huge population crisis because the population is aging because less people are having children. That's pretty much the number one threat to Japanese society right now, beyond outside factors like, North Korea. Within a few generations, Japan might not exist if it doesn't make changes, especially when you consider the fact that the decreasing population is not creating a strong I guess their equivalent of Social Security. You don't have young people working, you don't have the government taking money from that to support Social Security, to support the older generations. So everything's collapsing in Japan if it doesn't get its crap together. Now, immigration, being someone who's sort of, bicultural, I understand both Western, specifically American culture, and Japanese culture, given my heritage and I guess how I was raised. I've noticed in the West there seems to be this strong, almost romanticization of immigration. While Japanese culture definitely has a more realistic take on immigration, basically in the end, many of them don't think immigration's a proper answer to fixing the population crisis, because if you take in too many immigrants, there goes the culture. And if there's one thing Japanese love, it's their culture. I've noticed that we had a culture festival once in my school, and I was like, oh, okay, a culture festival, and then, we're celebrating, like, a lot of global cultures, a lot of different, like, here's this section about Nigerian culture, and here's this section about Hispanic culture. I'm like, but that's not the mainstream culture, though. In Japan, when you have a culture festival, it's celebrating Japanese culture. And I think that's a very interesting divergence between the two, between Western, specifically American culture, and Japanese culture. Now, being from the inside of both of those groups, I kind of see that the two groups have more in common with each other than I think the other one realizes. But, that might be a story for another day. But the fact of the matter is, when looking at the premise for the anime and the current social issues Japan's facing, immigration's not really considered an option. How the show decides to solve it is through, which this is a very Japanese solution to it, but through bureaucracy. Through the government stepping in and maintaining a system where they basically take the genetics and personality of people and of the entire population, like run tests and find like the most compatible person for you in the entire country once you reach 16. And then they partner you together, and then you're pretty much expected to like get to know each other at 16, and then like as your life goes on, eventually get married and have children. So the Japanese population will stabilize. And in the show, in the manga, that does work. The population does stabilize. And at first, it was only 20% of the people were willing to do it, because it's very hard to make something catch on in Japanese culture. Again, you don't want to go against the grain, I guess. But as people were finding success with it, boom, instantly the entire country was pretty much doing it. And there was you were looked at as sort of weird if you didn't go into that system where, the government picks out your partner for you. And then, it would hurt your chances on getting a job or getting into other higher forms of education, stuff like that, if you rejected your marriage set up by the government. Or not marriage, but a partnership set up by the government. After all, this starts at age 16. Now, that's the world this anime is set in. We have our main character, Mr. I can't bother to remember his name. Let me pull up a list. Yukari Nejima. There we go. Yukari Nejima. You have this dude who's had this crush on this girl in his class, Misaki Takasaki, since 5th grade, when she was sort of trying to work on a test or something, but she didn't have an eraser, so she was panicking. And, this is sort of a situation I found myself in. But Yukari figures that out and eventually takes his eraser, rips it in half, and gives the other half to her. And he develops a crush on her, and she ends up developing a crush on him. Because she kind of got the idea that he had noticed that she was struggling for a while, and then finally decided to help out, and she really liked that kindness. This setup is interesting, and I'll bring it up later, assuming I don't forget to bring it up later, because it really ties into a theme in the show that I think is an important thing to be teaching, but I don't think the show keeps true to that theme. So, the two crush on each other, although they never talk to each other for years up until pretty much they're 16. Well, Yukari's slightly younger. Misaki has already turned 16, but she hasn't gotten her partner notice from the government yet. And Yukari's like just about to turn 15. And he realizes he's going to turn 16, he's going to get his notification from the government. And he's like, but I already like this person. And this is a world where, you know, it's weird if you end up liking someone outside of the system the government chooses for you. But he decides, you know, screw the government, I'm going to tell her how I feel, and he does that. And then he finds out that she likes him too, and they are both happy, and like, yay, and then he gets a notification, like, because it's at midnight, then he turns 16, because apparently, is that how it works? It does the day count and not the actual date? Not the actual time, because I don't think he was born exactly 12 a.m. midnight, but it turns 12 a.m. midnight. He gets an email notification that's all glitchy that says, you know, Misaki is chosen by the government. And then two government people, the glitchy message disappears and two government people show up like stalkers and give him the paper notification, and it partners him with a different girl. And he's like, but, you know, I just got a digital notification saying I was supposed to be with Misaki. And they're like, probably wrong. And like, oh, okay. So both he and Misaki are sad. But Yukari eventually meets up with his assigned wife, which is Ririna Sanda. I think it's half German, actually, but I'm not sure. And Ririna is kind of socially awkward, but after a little argument, because Yukari is, you know, depressed that he has to eventually marry this girl instead of Misaki, they eventually hit it off, and it's kind of true that the government picked out a very suitable person for Yukari. However, he still talks about how much he likes Misaki. He doesn't want to be with Ririna. He wants to be with Misaki, and Ririna, who, you know, hasn't known Yukari for a long time, is like, you know what, screw this system. You know, you talk to her, you keep working on this relationship with her, and, you know, I just want to watch because I'm interested in this little story of young lovers, you know. But she sort of separates herself from Yukari in that regard. So you have this whole thing where Misaki is sort of upset that Yukari's trying to go off the track the government set for him. She doesn't want him to put himself at further risk for her sake. So a good bit of the anime carries itself on that. Another bit carries on the fact that Ririna starts to end up liking Yukari because the government worked its magic, you know. And Yukari ends up kind of ending up liking Ririna back too. So he's facing this crisis of conscience as well. Now, this anime it's good with, I don't necessarily want to say character development, but maybe character progression. I don't feel like the show is dragging itself too much. I think it's dragging itself... I have a short attention span, so any show feels like it's dragging itself out to me, but I don't feel like it's dragging itself out too much. Also, the show has like only 5 original song tracks, and one of them is like a deeply emotional track that has to go with deeply emotional scenes. So you get a lot of emotional retrospective and introspective from the characters, because, you know, you only have a limited assortment of music to use for scenes. But yeah, you get a lot of that emotional introspection, I guess. And that really helps flesh out characters. But the thing is, I want to learn more about characters outside of their emotions, you know. There's this idea that for a successful romance anime, the characters in the romance anime need to be their own people by themselves, because that's how it is in real life. You know, nobody is just sitting there waiting for, like, the right one to come. Everyone has their own hobbies, everyone has their own thing, and very rarely will you end up with someone that's exactly like you. This show... it does a good job with Yukari and Ririna, but Misaki needs a little bit more development. However, there is an effort, especially in the manga, to say that, you know, Misaki's kind of mysterious and she kind of keeps to herself when she is not with other people. So that might be something that gets developed over time. Another problem with romance anime is I never feel that the male character is fully developed. In shoujo anime, the girl is fully developed as a character while the guy is sort of kind of bland, besides maybe a few archetypical traits. In shonen anime, romance anime geared towards men, the same thing happens. The girls are developed, the guys are kind of bland. And this is kind of... I think this is an effect of visual novels, because this is a thing for visual novels, so the player can project themselves onto the main character. But Koito Uso wasn't a visual novel. I think it's just a spread of the influence from the visual novel genre on the romance genre. But Yukari needs more personality. We've given him a quirk that he really likes burial mounds, which is good. That's what we need. So he can operate well by himself. He also operates well with his guy friend, Nisaka, Yusuke Nisaka. And here's another thing that I like about this anime. Yusuke Nisaka's freaking gay, man. And it's not like some Sekaiichi Hatsukoi gay stuff. Nisaka, I think, is a very believable gay character in anime, which is something that I find very, very rare. And Nisaka's done perfectly. Nisaka is... That's how you do it. That's how you write a gay character in romance anime. In a way, Nisaka's a much more interesting character than Yukari because of that. But the thing is, they do nothing with Nisaka. They haven't done much with him in the manga. They haven't done much with him with the fact that he's gay for Yukari in the anime either. But I think that just might be, pulling on the fact that it's a tragedy. And it's the fact that, Nisaka loves Yukari, yet, he'll never be able to go anywhere with that romance because Yukari is straight. And here reflecting back to how Yukari needs more character development, Yukari, in Japanese culture, there's the idea that the most submissive person you can be is the best person you can be. And while that can carry you far in Japanese culture, it won't carry you far in romance. That's just not how it works. Yukari is portrayed with always a slouching posture, always a sort of bring his voice up to a higher pitch than it should be, and just sort of rarely doing anything that you would think would make him be liked by Misaki, Ririna, and Nisaka, by the only three people he really talks to. There really needs to be more masculine traits about Yukari, I think. Now, the manga addresses this issue a little bit. The manga develops Yukari as this more, it develops his kind, selfless attitude he has. And I think they really needed to focus on that aspect, because that makes him a likable character. They were kind of building that up with the fact that he, ripped up his eraser and gave half of it to Misaki beforehand. So, and yeah, I don't feel they did enough of that in the anime. The anime ends, by the way, with what is essentially a go read the manga ending, and that's something I hate about, especially modern anime. Modern anime is like, they treat a 12-episode anime as if it's just a big advertisement for the manga. That's not what it's supposed to be, man. Come on now. So that's another huge detractor from the anime adaptation. But I did go ahead and read the manga, despite my pride, and it did develop things that I had an issue with in the anime version. One of them was, why does Yukari like Misaki, and to an extent Ririna, when we don't really see much of it besides the fact that they're two pretty girls? And the manga addresses that perfectly. There's this great scene with Yukari and another female character, who basically they come to this, by the way, I should have said this really early on, but this has intense spoilers for everything. If you want to watch it, watch it. Would I recommend it? Maybe. The premise, I want to say, if the premise sounds interesting to you, then read it. If the premise doesn't, or watch it. If the premise doesn't sound interesting to you, there's still a possibility you might like it, because the premise did not sound interesting to me. I didn't realize how much of the tragedy element they were going to pull through. Because that's the thing, it's a tragedy. You know that at some point, Yukari is going to have to end up with one of the girls, and the other girl is going to be left behind. And also Nisaka. So, you know it's going to end poorly for at least two characters. And all these characters are likable, by the way. But where was I? Yeah, I started reading the manga. And one of the government agency people, there's these two characters, the two people I mentioned, the government agency people who showed up at midnight in episode 1, they end up being fleshed out as characters, but they're also fleshed out as characters that develop the main themes of the story. But I could go into those characters, but I might need to actually write down my thoughts about those characters and how they really are vehicles for theme. And I think they're some of the most well-done characters in the story. But the female character ends up taking off, like, shoves Yukari. At the end, this is where I was. At the end, Ririna decides that, well, if Yukari likes Misaki so much, there's a way we can do it to annul our future marriage, and you can go off and be with Misaki, and I'll just have to be reassigned to a new person. And it was a very sad scene where they talked about that, because, they ended up liking each other too. But Ririna goes to the government agency and says, I want to annul my marriage. The girl member of the government agency is sort of upset because she believes that, you have to go with the government agency. If you don't, you're just a loser, basically. And you're going to ruin her record of having every couple she's oversaw work out. So she eventually talks to Yukari, shoves him in a bathroom, ends up taking off her clothes, and is like, oh, you feel horny, don't you? And he doesn't say anything, and she's about to kiss him, and he doesn't do anything to stop her. He's like, see, you would end up liking anybody. It doesn't matter that you have this crush on Misaki for 5 years or whatever. You can work out with anybody because that's how superficial you are. And that was one of my main critiques besides the portrayal of Yukari. My main complaint was, well, Yukari's kind of ending up liking Ririna too, and I know the government agency is supposed to be freaking magic like that, but if the crux of this show is his love for Misaki, Ririna should be irrelevant to him, and that was my big gripe. And the manga addresses that, and right now in the manga, that's sort of the character issue Yukari has to overcome. So that's something that I was really glad to see addressed. If you bother to watch the whole anime version, then continue on with the manga, because that's where it's starting to get good. It addresses the issues that I have. As for fan servicey stuff, with a premise like this, you'd expect it to have a lot of fan service, and it kind of does in the beginning, but it kind of mellows out as it goes on, and eventually the anime takes the tragedy elements. And eventually it just hurts to read it. It just hurts your heart. You're in no mood for any sort of fan servicey stuff. And I'm not a fan of fan service in anime, pretty much at all. But this anime and manga knows what it's doing in that regard. Now I feel like the show is the manga is reaching. I'm using show and manga interchangeably here, by the way. I feel that the show and manga are reaching the manga. The manga is reaching its end because we're developing the characters. There's only so much more we can develop out of them. So I think it has to come to an end soon, or else it will run the risk of just keep on going. And it was fairly popular in 2017, so I really hope it doesn't go down the route of we'll just keep on going and see how long we can go with this manga. Because that would be a shame. This is really the first romance tragedy anime that I've seen that wasn't, edgelord material with unlikable characters. Romeo and Juliet. Romeo and Juliet's the most famous romance tragedy. It's used as a centerpiece for, one of the arcs of the show. And I think that's really well done. I could probably talk more about this show. The soundtrack is beautiful. The soundtrack's weird, actually. One track I think is absolutely beautiful, and then 5 other tracks have the same themes of that track. But sometimes it feels like their audio mixing's weird. Sometimes it feels like the music is a little bit too loud in the show. Well, they could be having a casual conversation, and in the background you just hear someone wailing on guitars, and that doesn't feel like it belongs here, does it? But one of the tracks, Confession, which might be in the background of this video itself, I don't know. I really like that track, and I'm actually trying to learn it on piano right now. So that was pretty good. Animation solid, character design solid, I think. Sometimes character design seems a little bit over the top, but it ends up working out okay. Yeah, I'm really hoping this manga ends on the best case scenario. The manga addresses and fully develops and fleshes out all the issues I had with it so far. It ends timely in a good manner, and a second season picks up and wraps up the rest of the manga in anime form. That's the best case scenario. If it does that, this would easily be a 9 out of 10 for me. By the way, the ending to the anime sucks. It's terrible. It's not what it takes the promise of a tragedy and just tosses it on its head. So as long as you just ignore that weird ending it has, on the anime adaptation, continue on with the manga, and hopefully they adapt the remainder of the manga for a second season, and with a proper ending, then it will be kosher. It will be pretty good in my book. Have you watched Koitoso? If so, tell me about your thoughts in the comments below. I am coming just off of watching and reading the entire manga/anime, so I might have more positive thoughts than I will a month from now. We'll see. But yeah, that's just my thoughts on this show.